Hello, everybody.
Hello. We're back for our second episode going through rebuttals that Muslims may bring up to respond to points that we raised during the Master Key. And for the last episode, which I think was 8, on where we started navigating rebuttals, we looked at essentially verses that Muslims can bring up to claim the Qur'an teaches corruption in the Torah. This time we're going to be tackling kind of the second part of the first pillar, which is we bring up the Dead Sea Scrolls. So, of course, this could be something that Muslims may raise some kind of objection to or reaction to. But I guess before we get into specific ways they could respond, Alex, do you have, maybe you could say, what's, with all the people you've talked to, what do you normally encounter? Do they question the Dead Sea Scrolls? What do they say about it?
Yes, of course, Muslims will question Dead Sea Scrolls. They have two objections usually to raise up. One pretty lame, and from people who doesn't know a lot of details, they claim that they heard that Dead Sea Scrolls were all forgery by rabbis. One guy basically said it's all rabbis, let's say rabbis' fault. They created this enormous body of material, all forgery and everything, which of course you can't even argue with this point. But they just hear about something which was fraudulent among the Dead Sea Scrolls. People try to make money using the old parchments, but they introduce writings, like modern writings on the parchment. And it was caught by the professionals who actually studied the original Dead Sea Scrolls. And we have a video to play to show you, right? That's one part, which very easy to debunk. There's no big deal there. The second one, knowledgeable Muslims will say, well, there is not, the Dead Sea Scrolls are not preserved. Yeah, they're not preserved completely. Like they're not complete, and therefore we don't know what was missing.
Right.
So anything could happen. Even the name of Muhammad ibn Abdullah could be mentioned there. I mean,
not that we'll say that, but
yeah. So how can I say no? Well, I have to say maybe.
Sure.
Just in case, lightly.
They'll talk about not many of them, and I think in my experience it's very uncommon for them to even say anything, especially because I think most of them haven't even heard of them, don't even really know much of anything about it. But something else somebody might say is, well, there's differences, there's variance between, let's say, the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint, right? Or the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Masoretic text, the later Hebrew. So yeah, differences or variance in the text. I did have one guy say that maybe it was a Zionist conspiracy.
Yeah, well, yeah. That's what I heard.
It was the Israelis, right? Because it was
the rabbis. So
he didn't say rabbis. He would just said must be the Israelis.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's hard to fight that kind of argument.
Well, actually, I did, because it was most of the scholars weren't Israeli, so I mean, what do you do with the non-religious scholars and the
but what happened is it's like a religious Zionist Jews planted them inside for non-religious to find it in perfect timing.
Yeah. I mean, maybe they found them and they changed it and then they put them back.
Or they have a time machine, which is more probable, a high probability.
Jews have they're like omnipotent. They can do anything.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Apart from all the stuff, so we're gonna introduce a reality. Today we're gonna show the real Hebrew letters which survive, right?
Yeah.
So on a previous video, which I'll link below, you can watch our conversation about like very important parts of like from a Dead Sea Scroll which survived, and compare it with Masoretic texts as Septuagint and Samaritan Pentateuch, but it was all in English. Today we're going to show you original, so in Hebrew. So here's a presentation, and let me show it to you. And that's we're going to use what are called the Biblical Qumran Scrolls. This is volume 1. That's what we're going to use. And there's a lot of...
Yeah, so it should be said that this is a critical edition. It's a scholarly text.
Yeah.
Edited by Eugene Elric. Yeah, so this is not a common book in India or something.
For sure.
Scholarly text where, yeah, they basically cataloged all the biblical texts that they've discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls and put it in their original languages and marked up also where there are variants comparing the Dead Sea Scroll text to the Masoretic text and other manuscripts like manuscripts of the Septuagint.
Yeah.
Yep.
But that's how it looked like, right? So they just basically put it for us to read. No, I can read it, but Greg could, so therefore it's under the ball in your like.
I don't know about this. I mean, it's pretty difficult. I mean, I could read some of it, but
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the first one.
Handwritten is difficult.
Yeah, so just read for everybody in Hebrew, and we're gonna show you English translation. First, very important passage. So
yeah, so you want me to read it? Okay, so we're reading from Genesis 2, verse 17. So I'm just going to be reading the partial sections which we've highlighted, which, we're highlighting some significant details that are worth mentioning that are present in the text. So, Uma'et hada'at tovara achalcha mimenu motamut.
Okay, so
that English.
Part of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall not eat from it, for the day you eat from it, you shall surely die. That basic idea is very important. As you see, a lot of things, a lot of verses were not saved from corruption of the time and animals, or I should say insects. But very important phrase, which is tree of knowledge of good and evil, which is totally missing in the Quran, we have in every single manuscript of the Torah, including Dead Sea Scrolls in Hebrew. So there is no manuscript of the Torah or modern copy of the Torah which has no tree of good and evil. So it's perfect example how it's been preserved in very important detail.
And something that I've been thinking about for this is, even though, we've got missing other stuff, right?
Yeah.
But the more you analyze the narratives, certain details are interconnected with others. So if you have this, you can't have the rest of the narrative look like the Quran.
Exactly.
Right? So you would expect, even where we have gaps, that it's going to look more like the biblical story that we have in the complete text of Masoretic text, because once you have this detail, it's actually funny. Just above it, you can see Tigris, right?
Yep.
It flows on, right? The third Tigris. So if you have rivers going around Eden, it's we're talking about on Earth. We're not talking about
absolutely
heavenly.
Very good point. Very good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Next.
Yeah.
So we have Genesis 37, is the story of Joseph. And as we see, a lot of missing parts, but what very important highlighted part. Could you please read it?
Yeah. It says, Haya roe et echayv batson.
So, English translation is that he was somebody feeding the flock with his brothers. So that indicates that Joseph was a shepherd. Before he has a problem and argument with his brothers, and before he was thrown into the well, which is going against the Quran, when it suggested that he was not even at the age of like to work, like he was very young, maybe 5 to 7 years old, no more than that, because brothers have to ask father in the Quran to let father give them Joseph for rent, for lease, to play, right? Because they cannot see him. He was so protected by the father.
Yeah, and the term, actually, if you look there in the English where it says feeding, the Hebrew term is roeh, which is the verbal form of to shepherd. Okay. So it's not just like giving food.
Oh, all right, yeah.
It's shepherding. It's tending to the flock.
Tending to the flock.
It's a word that implies the flock, which flock isn't complete there, but it's implied by the verb.
Yeah. So basically, we have one of the major differences in the Quran and the Torah is the age of Joseph and what kind of work or what he was doing in the house of his or the tent of his father. So according to the Quran, he was maybe 5 to 7 years old. He was always with his father. Father didn't let him even play with his brothers. But the Torah is 17 years old, like clearly stated that he was 17 years old. And he was not playing with his brothers, which Torah agreed completely, because he was working with them every day.
Well, and actually, definitively, I was just thinking about this because the age being so young in the Quran, maybe probably 5 to 7, doesn't give the exact age. But I was just thinking in Surah 12, it says that when the brothers approach their father to take Joseph with them, they're asking for permission, and they're saying they're going to supervise him. So if he needs supervision, he's not going to be having the responsibility of shepherding the flock.
Oh yeah, for sure. And yet we see how the old Torahs on the planet Earth, all copies of the Torah are exactly the same. But they all contradict our Quran. Next.
All right.
And that's the story of his
39.
and Potiphar's wife.
Yeah, so this is the scene when she is trying to seduce him. Okay, so the verse there is Bigdo Vayada Vayanas. So actually on the screen there's a lot highlighted, but I'm just reading a simple phrase.
And the idea is that he left his garment in her hand and fled away.
And especially should be emphasized, he went outside.
Right? He went outside,
You can see in verse 16, he fled and went out.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's against contradict the Quran when they were rushing to the door together and they meeting the husband of that wife at the door. So Joseph didn't run outside. He couldn't. So he was stopped by his master. Yeah,
she locked the door.
Oh yeah, she locked the door before that for sure. Yeah. So that's we see again how all the Torahs on the planet agreeing with the story that he ran away outside, leaving the garment on her hands without being stopped by anybody, and including the wife of that. The husband of that wife. So next one is now Exodus. It's one of our favorite passage. We use a lot talking to Muslims.
Well, we just see the phrase "bat paro" repeatedly, which is
5 times.
Yeah, and you can go to the English.
Yeah, I'm gonna go English, and what we see is actually Well, one is missing on verse 10, but the remainers we have extra one even. So technically it should be not 6 times daughter of Pharaoh mentioned in the Dead Sea Scrolls, 5 times it's mentioned in the Masoretic text.
Yeah.
And the reason is because the Quran said it was the wife of Pharaoh who adopted Moses. And it's definitely in contradiction with every single, again, Torah on the planet Earth when it said the daughter of Pharaoh. And you cannot just make a mistake. Well, you have to make 6 times mistakes, right?
I was actually thinking too, I mean, the Quran really emphasizes that the wife of Pharaoh was a virtuous woman of faith and example. So it's like, so you can't just change it that simply.
Oh, that's for sure, yeah. And we're going to show the variant because that's in the green.
Yeah.
It is variant because in Masoretic text it says she. So the Masoretic text has only 5 mention of daughter of Pharaoh, while the earliest manuscript that is close mentioned it 6 times.
Yeah,
well,
just so people understand what it says, 4Q Exodus B is the name of the Dead Sea Scrolls manuscript. SP stands for Samaritan Pentateuch and LXX is Septuagint. Yeah. So all 3 of those agree, whereas the Hebrew Masoretic text just has the pronoun she.
Yeah, so which doesn't make any difference in the text. Next one. That's about Moses and meeting with daughters. How many daughters we have?
It says Sheva Banot.
Which is 7 daughters. So that's interesting part again, because the Quran insists 3 times in a row that it was only 2 daughters who came to the well. While Torah said, not so fast, it's 7 daughters. Next. Now we're talking about road of Moses.
Okay. So when it says Ahron et Matehu Ifnei Paro, and that's verse 10. And then verse 11, we have a section where it says Vaya'asu Gamhem Hartume Mitzrayim. Okay, so it says Aaron blank, meaning he threw down his rod before Pharaoh, and they also, the magicians of Egypt, did the same.
The major difference is from the Quran. It was magicians who asked Moses who gonna throw first, and he said, "Go ahead and you do first." But in the Torah, it's Aaron who did it, and he did first, and magician did the last. So, as we see, the small detail, but nevertheless,
that small actually, there's so many differences in just what you said. If you look at it enough, having the contest, who's suggesting it, who ends up doing it. I think it was God's order in the first place that they do it, and Aaron does it. So it's just, there's so much emphasis in the Quran on it being Moses' staff and him doing it. So yeah, it's a significant difference.
Okay, the next one. Again, second part with the road.
V'ata harem et matacha unte et yadcha al hayam.
And you lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea. Well, anybody who knows the Quran, it was saying that Allah asked Moses to strike the sea with the rod, while in the Torah it's simply stretch in the direction of the sea, over the sea, without hitting the water. Right. Next.
Okay, Numbers 16.
That's a Korah, rebellion of Korah.
Okay, so it says Vayikahalu al Moshe va'al Ahron Vayomru Alehem Rav Lachem.
So Korah rebelled, and the reason for rebellion were like power struggle. And he said, "You have gone too far. All the congregation are holy, every one of them." So basically, he said, like he challenged with his friends, Moses and Aaron, saying, "Why you only leaders? We all should be leaders too, because entire congregation are holy, or for all the congregation are holy, every one of them." So, well, the problem is here when compare the Quranic passage is actually a reason for God to punish Korah, and only Korah and his family, nobody else with him. It's about he was greedy. He has a lot of riches, and he said, I'm rich because that's my my ability to make me rich, right?" So as we see, it's totally different.
I think they all despised him, right? In the Quran? Do the people despise him? I forget.
No, they like him.
They like him, okay.
Yeah. A lot of them like him, but then they get scared and they said, "Oh yeah, well, we change our mind." Not so much in the Torah. It was opposite in the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
Next one. Hosea 12 supposed to be.
Vaya'avod.
Avot, yeah. So that's interesting. How few words are left. But the word which we're looking for is right there, which is served. So it's Hosea 12:12. It's a prophet who lived about 700 years after Moses. He just mentioned by passing, right, about that it was Jacob or Israel who ran to the field of Syria, and he served for a wife, and for a wife he tended the flock. So it's direct reference to Moses not Moses, no, Jacob. Jacob. Now I'm thinking the Quran, right?
Yeah.
Jacob served for his wife 14 years plus. Actually, he spent more than that, and in at Laban's house. While the Quran is making them one of the biggest blunder, the author of the Quran, which is Muhammad ibn Abdullah, literate Bedouin of 7th century, when he said he attributed the service of 8 or 10 years not to Jacob, but to Moses.
Mm-hmm.
But here we have extra Torah reference of serving, like who served it, it's Jacob who served it.
Yeah, and it's like corroboration from
it's a corroboration, yeah, it's
later
a
on.
corroboration. So it's just proving again this one word is basically proving entire Quran is false. And another one, Jonah.
Okay. Verse 6. Vayaman Adonai Elohim Kikayon Vaya'al Me'al Vayona.
And some parts of the
that's verse 6. And I want to do that one first.
All right, let's go for from another cave.
From verse 7. Vatach et hakikayon vayivash.
So it's what it said, and the Lord God appointed a plant and made it to come up over Jonah. And then the morning arose to the next day, and it attacked, like a worm attacked the plant, so that is withered. So the reason is differences between the Quran is because in the Quran, the plant grew up over Jonah when he was still at the seashore, in order to help him to restore his health. While in the Bible, in the Old Testament, in the Tanakh, God made the plant arose over Jonah only to destroy the plant next day.
Mm-hmm.
And when Jonah started crying over for death, and he was so upset because he lost the plant, God taught him a lesson about that it's bad to be a racist because they're
Right.
not racist, right?
And you can actually see that at the bottom of the last line there. It's better for me to die than to live.
Yeah, so he was suicidal. He was a very upset guy, and he was angry guy, and whatever.
Yeah.
Right?
It's
And yet,
total opposite of Islam.
yeah. So, and that's we could see the staggering difference between all the passages. So, whatever survived from Jonah among Dead Sea Scrolls, which is like what 700, 800 years before Muhammad was even born, and yet it's talking about exactly the same event.
You know, it's funny. I was just thinking because the rabbis, we can see from the Midrash, tried to preserve Jonah's reputation.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And yet here we have like suicidal Jonah.
And it's funny because nobody made such a great work of preserving or whitewashing the reputation of the Jonah or his sins of Jonah, but Muhammad himself. In the Quran is not even there. Like the reason is rabbis have to struggle it because they have to still refer to the Tanakh.
Yeah.
So they bound to that story of the Tanakh. So they're coming out with the idea of why Jonah rebelled against God in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
But the Quran has no such thing. It just tells the story completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Tafsir ibn Kathir, it's just make it amazingly bad for Muslims and amazingly good for us, so we can have really good conversation over it. But again, it shows us all the Torahs on the planet Earth, Tanakh, sorry, it's about Tanakh. All the Tanakhs on the planet Earth are exactly, they're agreeing with each other and they're exactly the same retelling the same story over and over and over again. So it's only one book on the planet Earth which tells alternative story is the Quran.
Mm-hmm.
And the last one, it's actually sin of David, King David.
Okay, so the first part just is a name, Bathsheba. That's Bathsheba. And then the bottom part, actually I have to read it from here. So, Anochi Hara. So, it's a bit
Which
different
is?
order, but it's exactly the same meaning. So, it's Bathsheba says, I am with child.
So exactly what every other Tanakh, copy of Tanakh said, it's sin of David, who fathered kid by somebody else.
Committing adultery. And,
yeah, committed adultery. That's completely absent from the Quran. And yet, corroboration of manuscript of Masoretic text and Dead Sea Scrolls and Septuagint and Samaritan Pentateuch and everything in between. It's amazingly. It's almost like we don't like. It's been so well preserved for us to, argue against Islam because Quran is telling story completely opposite.
Mm-hmm.
While no scroll of the Torah or the Tanakh ever tell the story differently. And all the difference of the wording, they are like different nahrus or kirayats.
Right.
They don't affect the text at all.
Yeah, you can see like it's a difference in sort of the form of a verb, or it's a pronoun, or explaining the identity of the pronoun, things like that.
So that concludes our what do you call it? Argument, I should say. Right?
Yeah, our response to that.
Our response.
Yeah. So the first kind of main thing is that there's that it's not complete, right? It's fragmentary. That's okay. Well, if we're gonna limit ourselves to fragments, it's still confirming everything we've got, and like it's not telling us a different thing, right?
Exactly.
And even if you limit it yourself to that, and you have to reason from what's there, that's you're still gonna get it. If Joseph ran out of the room, the whole story is different.
Exactly.
Right? Because in the Quran, he's interrogated by Al-Aziz, which is Potiphar. Because Potiphar essentially has used the biblical name. He comes, he's at the door on the other side of the door. Joseph never makes it out of the room. So he's interrogated, and I mean, he's found guilty in Genesis right away and sent to prison right away and given no defense. So it's completely opposite on so many things just by having that one thing present. And you can, do that with pretty much all those examples. You can think about the context for what it's saying and how the context can't fit the Quranic one either. So the small details really matter.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So
and we need to talk about the accusation of forgery.
Yeah. So we're gonna play 4 minutes video clip on the
Right. Well, let's just kind of explain the context of this. So what's this video? Who made it, and what's it about?
So what happened is, some years ago, this millennium, in the beginning of this millennium, the Biblical Museum of Washington, the Bible Museum
Museum of the Bible.
Museum of the Bible in Washington purchased certain parchments of look like leftover from Dead Sea Scrolls collection, which was never been presented before. And then they published even books about it or whatever. But they decided at a certain point, to check just in case. And they called people who've been professionals in that matter and who are working with the original Dead Sea Scrolls, which are mainly in, I think it's in Jerusalem, in the Museum of the Bible. And they came and they look at, I think it was 16 or 18 small pieces of whatever, like text. And they examine it under the microscope, and you could see it clearly, how they explain it. And they unanimously, they conclude that it was, all of them were forgery. But it's only this several, less than two dozen of kind of nearly discovered fragments.
Yeah, we should say it doesn't even really, it has almost nothing in terms of text on it. It's not even part of like what we were reading from. We're reading from the critical edition published by scholars, Dead Sea Scroll scholars. It's not even part of that. So it's not like, a little bit of that might be affected. Nothing is affected. Mm-hmm. So yeah, anyway, we can talk more about it after the video.
So let's watch a video.
This project was initiated because since 2002, many previously unknown textual fragments inscribed in Hebrew and Aramaic have surfaced on the antiquities market. They were believed to be newly discovered biblical artifacts belonging to the canon of the Dead Sea Scroll discovery. The Museum of the Bible curates over a dozen of these fragments, and 13 were published by a team of scholars. The museum put together a team of experts, an independent advisory team that consisted of scientists, conservators, and imaging experts.
I am head of book and paper conservation at the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore. And my own particular specialty is the conservation of medieval manuscripts on parchment. Back in the early 1990s, I was involved in a project with the original Dead Sea Scrolls at the Rockefeller Museum in Jerusalem. So I have some familiarity with the Dead Sea Scrolls and how they were made and how they've deteriorated over time and how they've been restored and conserved.
Through physical examination, it was determined that the substrate of the museum's scroll fragments appears to be leather rather than the parchment that is characteristic of the authentic Dead Sea Scrolls. Scientific analysis further concluded that the raw skins that were used as writing material appears to have been treated with lime, which is a technology that postdates the original scrolls. The origin of the substrate leather is unknown, but appears to be scraps of archaeological leather that could have originated in Qumran or the Dead Sea region. One of the things that we found to be really interesting is that some of the holes on the fragments appear to be man-made. Instead of being made by insects boring through the material, we think they look more like the lacing holes you would find on ancient Roman shoes or sandals. There was so much physical evidence that made it obvious to us that someone had taken old material and simply applied modern ink in the form of scripture in order to make them look like they were authentic Dead Sea Scrolls. As we can see here, ink is going across and into deep cracks in the substrate. The ink is also skipping over high points of the grain layer and waterfalls off the edges of the fragments. Here you can see it lying on top of thick granular mineral deposits. Obviously, 2,000 years ago, scribes would have used clean parchment for their writing. We also noticed abnormal ruling lines were evident on some of the fragments. Also seen here, a variety of loose mineral deposits were scattered over the fragments after writing, perhaps even before the ink had dried, in order to give the impression that these were authentic Dead Sea Scroll fragments that had come from the Qumran caves and had been buried there for centuries. There were many other things that were also suspicious about these fragments. All of them, despite being purchased from different sources, were remarkably similar in that they were coated with a shiny amber material, most likely animal skin glue. We believe the fragments might have been further manipulated to simulate the surface appearance of original scrolls. We can conclude, and in fact, we unanimously agreed that none of the fragments in the Museum of the Bible's collection are in fact authentic. Not only are they not authentic, they are deliberate and clever forgeries designed to look like original Dead Sea Scrolls.
Well, I think it's amazing because I only encounter a few times people, Muslims, trying to tell me that, oh, your Dead Sea Scrolls is forgery because of article or the video about this, right? So when I watched the video, I read an article. I said, guys, I don't think you understand what you're saying, because it's actually opposite. So, and because she said something like, because I work with original Dead Sea Scrolls, I know how to see difference, right? So
So actually, the implication is that if they know how to spot the forgeries by seeing the ink go into the cracks, because the cracks were formed over time as the writing surface aged, because the forgers took an old writing surface and like an old material, and then to make it look like, oh, this is an old writing, they wrote on that old material. But because that old material had aged and developed cracks, the ink, when they put it on at a later time, went into the cracks. So that means that isn't the case with the genuine ones, right?
Exactly.
If they know how to look for that.
They saw the genuine.
They've looked at it with the genuine, and they can see that it's not that.
It's like, how, the solid banknote, the real one, and you could see the fake one immediately. That's what they did, right? Yeah. And also, she said it was not parchment, but leather skin,
right?
Which is unusual, and they figure out it was just the sandals of Roman soldiers. Like whatever somebody find it by whatever means, right? And they decided to make some money on the side by applying ink on it. So,
and you can kind of imagine the museum as a private, institution.
Yeah,
they're trying to make money, right? So they see, even though I'm sure it's probably a Christian place and they're trying to intend to do everything well, they're still motivated to, like, oh wow, if you can actually have some portions of the Dead Sea Scrolls in the collection, that's amazing. So yeah, I mean, you're probably inclined to you want it to be genuine so you can get it. So they didn't do their proper due diligence to check at the beginning when they were looking at acquiring it. And I don't remember what it was that got them on the track to check it, but they did, and then they found it's not real.
So as we see, like so far, what we see is the Dead Sea Scrolls stand as very, very fundamental, important witness for the Torah and against Quran.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. Not only Torah, even Tanakh, right?
Yep.
And definitely, I believe it's a gift of God for us. Without Dead Sea Scrolls, we could have only Septuagint, which is predates birth of Muhammad, to argue from. But somebody could say, well, we don't know what text was translated, and who knows, right? But when we found Dead Sea Scrolls written in Hebrew, we can compare with Masoretic text, which is written in Hebrew to Hebrew. And that's what we did today. And we find out that it's all amazingly preserved.
Yeah, it's even, even when you think of the New Testament stuff, that's has those details in it.
Okay, yeah.
It kind of goes both ways, right? The earlier manuscripts of the Dead Sea Scrolls of the Old Testament texts actually corroborate the New Testament.
Yeah.
And vice versa, the New Testament is corroborating that the text was that it's relying on, that it's drawing those stories from is the way we have it, and the way we see some elements of that in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Like, actually, I was just even thinking just now, looking at Bathsheba, she's pregnant. Okay, right? Okay, so in the New Testament, there's this one little reference in Matthew 1 in the genealogy for Jesus. It says the wife of Uriah.
Yes.
Right? So it doesn't name her as Bathsheba because it's probably avoiding naming her. But it's the wife of Uriah, which brings in the whole relationship just in that phrase.
Yep. And proving the point of David's sinfulness versus the Quran, David's cleanliness, right?
Yeah.
In the Quran, he didn't do anything like that.
Yeah. And daughter of Pharaoh, and these other examples. Yeah, and we can corroborate a lot of the stuff that's not in the Dead Sea Scrolls. We can corroborate in other manuscripts, like Septuagint manuscripts that predate Muhammad. We can also corroborate it in other sources, like the Antiquities of the Jews by Josephus, which, while the manuscript may not predate Muhammad, the composition of it does, and scholars are not wondering about the corruption of, I don't know, the story of Noah or the story of Abraham or whatever, or Philo and all his different writings, interpreting text allegorically, or church fathers, and all sorts of things that corroborate the stories the way we have it in our Old Testaments. We should actually probably close with the clip from Shabir, where he talks about the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay. He says, he's, as somebody who interacts with the Christian community in apologetics, he knows the weight of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It confirms the Old Testament that we have. Right, so we could maybe add that in.
All right, I'll do it.
Yeah. All right, well, thanks for joining us, and hope you're learning along the way as we are, and better equipped and more confident about even the text that we have, and hope you join us for more.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
The first 5 of these books is called the Torah, and that is said to be the Torah of Moses. Is this the Torah that the Quran is referring to? Well, sometimes, because sometimes the Quran is talking about the book that people have in their hands at the moment, and that's called Torah. But sometimes the Quran is also talking about the book that was revealed to Musa alayhi salam, the prophet Moses. So are the two the same? Well, not necessarily. One of the oldest copies we have of the Torah is is the Aleppo Codex, which dates back to about 1,000 years ago, which would mean some 2,000 years after Moses. But the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in the caves of Qumran on the bank of the Dead Sea, which is now within the occupied West Bank in Palestine, those scrolls show a high level of concordance with the present copies of the Hebrew Scriptures. So we can have confidence that up until the time of the Qumran scrolls, which was about 2,000 years ago, the Bible was about the same from that time to the time that it is now, at least when we're dealing with the Torah and the Psalms.